Ooh, welcome into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and it's time for the Week 12 wide receiver rankings. And I just want to let you know, of course, you can find these rankings up on the website, www.theffforge.com. There are projections. We'll be going through them in tiers. You can see on the screen the projections. If you don't care for these projections, if you want a little simpler view as well, up on the website, you just click on this little tab at the bottom of that page, and you can just see the players and the rankings that they're in. So that's what's coming. But before we look forward to this week, we do need to take a look backwards at how I did with my loves and my fades. And leading into this, I want to say, so it's kind of a refresher sometimes when I look at these loves and fades, because sometimes there is a, let's say 70% of the questions surround around two or three players. And I happen to be on the wrong point of view for those players. And therefore, I feel like I've failed like everybody. And I know I haven't failed everybody, but I also feel like I definitely have. And I can even say probably the most people that have unsubscribed after a week that I've ever seen after last week, I was convinced of and had convinced you all of the second coming of Juju Smith-Schuster, and that was a question that a lot of people were actually thinking of, so I wasn't the only one. I don't know if it's my fault that you're thinking of it in the first place for some of you, but that didn't come through. The Audric Estimate thing, hey, I know I was not on an island there. That did not come through. A lot of things that just didn't work out, but also a lot of things that maybe I was on an island on that I also got right, like a Jauan Jennings. So last week, for my loves and my fates, I got 2 out of 3 correct in each of these scenarios, and I even would argue, no, I would not argue. Well, I would argue Calvin Ridley, one of my loves. I would rank him the same. Yet again, he was a must start in my opinion. It didn't work out. He finished as wide receiver 43. However, Jauan Jennings did work out, finished as wide receiver 8. Will he work out again this week? I don't know, but I do once again have him ranked quite well, and it looks like the experts have almost caught up to me, but he continues to succeed at a very, very high rate. In fact, in projections-wise and everything, you will see he is like the wide receiver 1 now, based on the small sample size of the 3 games that he's played without either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk. And then for George Pickens, I said that I expected him to disappoint, and in my opinion, he did, but he also still got us, like, compared to the expectations. You know, myself, everybody else, we had him as a top 10 wide receiver. He got 12.9 fantasy points, half PPR scoring. Not shabby. You can deal with that. That's part of the reason of why he was a love, right? Even if he didn't come through with a touchdown for you, even if he didn't have a 150-yard type of day, he'd still have a decent day, and he did. So thank you for, somewhat coming through, George, for those who played him. Then for the fades, I faded Jakobi Meyers. I had him as my wide receiver 48, significantly lower than the experts. Didn't like the matchup and how things were going. Thought it would be a pass funnel right to the tight end. That's exactly what happened. Jameson Williams, another fade of mine. The game went as I expected. This is another one where I might change it a little bit, but I would have the same concerns for Jameson Williams in that matchup if you gave me that matchup yet again this upcoming weekend. I expected that Detroit would take a lead through the running game very quickly, establish that, and then maybe, not pass so much. But Detroit just kept throwing the ball even after doing that, and took an even larger lead. I just didn't expect that from them. I thought we'd sit on our big lead. He finished as a wide receiver 7, so big time fail on fading Jameson Williams ultimately, but I thought the process was sound. Nico Collins was someone who was in somewhat of a similar situation of we expected that team to dominate, and therefore we could have been a little bit lower on him. I was actually kind of bold on Nico Collins because I thought that early in that game they would take a deep shot to Nico Collins. They did. It was a touchdown. Everything worked out there too, as I kind of had said, but it was called back due to offensive line issues. So, these things happen. I can't get 100% no matter what I do here. Amari Cooper was my other fade, finished as the wide receiver 49. However, I do have to say I thought there were some promising signs for upcoming weeks for Amari Cooper when the matchups get a little bit better. So I did like what I saw on the field in terms of future potential there. Let's get on to this week's rankings. And this is my first tier. Oh, that's not very nice. Let's see. My wide receivers 1 through 6 kicks off with Cooper Kupp. These are your must starts. I don't think I need to explain these. Of course, despite the tough matchups for Cooper Kupp, tough matchup for Nico Collins, Philadelphia, Tennessee, respectively, tough matchup for Justin Jefferson, Chicago. We're playing these guys. Amon-Ra St. Brown, nice matchup there against Indianapolis. Fine matchup. A.J. Brown, rather good matchup there against the Los Angeles Rams. Maybe he could be my wide receiver 1. He just doesn't get a whole lot of targets. And then Puka Nacua, also tough matchup there against Philadelphia. And because of this, I actually, sneaky play, just throwing it out there, Demarcus Robinson, I think, is a solid play this week, being the third man for Philadelphia to be concerned about. And that might be where, the biggest weakness is in that defense. That's going to bring us on to this second tier of wide receivers. It's a small little tier from my wide receiver 7 through 10. These guys still in good matchups. There's a tier that I kind of broke up into 2 because the next set are in tougher matchups, and I wanted to just kind of dictate, hey, you know what, I'm not changing these guys anymore. If you know, I tried to keep my rankings within these tiers rest of the week, any changes that I make, for the most part. George Pickens is my wide receiver 7 this week, going up against Cleveland, followed by Mike Evans, Malik Neighbors, DK Metcalf, assuming Mike Evans, of course, is coming back. There's not a guarantee there, but I am expecting him back, and without Chris Olave there, I'm expecting him to have a higher, safer floor, be a safer play in general. Did I say Chris Olave? Because I meant Chris Godwin. Without Chris Godwin there, I expect his floor to be much better than you can see it is. It doesn't scare me too much against the New York Giants anyways. I think Mike Evans is single-handedly better than anybody that they have that could cover him, despite kind of liking their secondary. And with that higher floor, that ceiling definitely is still in place for Mike Evans that we all know and love. Other than that, let's get on to this next tier of wide receivers. My wide receivers 11 through 16. It starts off with Jauan Jennings, so I am still a little high on him. I just wanted to show you because it is a 3-game sample size now. Here's the projections. The 3 games, the last 2 weeks, and then 1 game earlier this season where Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel were missing, and it's been smash plays. And for as long as his tight end is missing too, all the better for Jauan Jennings. Something about George Kittle, just, he's pretty good. Other than that, Tyreek Hill is my wide receiver 12, followed by Terry McLaurin, CeeDee Lamb, Zay Flowers, Deebo Samuel. And this is going to bring us to my first fade of this week at wide receiver 15 in Zay Flowers going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. And Los Angeles Chargers allow the 3rd fewest receptions to opponent wide receivers. So that's obviously not a great situation in general for these Baltimore receivers. But Flowers, a guy who's been boomer bust as is, a rare boomer bust that actually relies on, gets a decent amount of volume in general. There is a limited amount of volume in this game. And games where we have seen him receive 6 or fewer targets, he has had 3.8 half PPR fantasy points, 1.5, 3.5, 27.2 on top of 2 touchdowns in that game, a 5.4 fantasy game, and then last week he did have 10.9 on 6 targets as well. But it's going to take, that's a touchdown in there for that 10.9. He's going to need a touchdown almost certainly in this game to blow up. To have a good week. And then, as you've seen, he did blow up 1 week, though, so that's promising. And why we can't exactly just outright sit Zay Flowers for just anybody. But I am very concerned about that for him. Deebo Samuel, wide receiver 16. That's going to bring us on to my next tier of wide receivers. From wide receiver 17 on to wide receiver 22, we've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, Cortland Sutton, Ladd McConkey, Calvin Ridley, Jaden Reed, Marvin Harrison Jr. And I have these guys highlighted just to remind myself that I have notes on them. From Ladd McConkey, I'm actually nervous about him. I think that Kyle Hamilton will probably be tasked to cover him a lot. Kyle Hamilton is a little bit banged up with an ankle issue recently. He still played through that. That could come in handy for Ladd McConkey, but I am very concerned about that matchup in what looks like a really good matchup against Baltimore. As you can see, the heating gauge, too, on him really, really hot. And then we've got Calvin Ridley going up against Houston. That's a nice matchup. that's where it ends. It's just like last week. It's a really, really nice matchup. I'd have a tough time sitting him, especially just for anybody. That's going to bring us on to this next tier of wide receivers. Just a little dinky tier here. My wide receivers 23 through 25 are Jameson Williams, Devonta Smith, and DeAndre Hopkins for Jameson Williams. This is actually a Jameson Williams versus Devonta Smith kind of rankings debate here. Both of these guys are boom and bust, and they landed right near each other in my rankings. I could have gone either way here, really could have, and so could you. Jameson Williams is my wide receiver 21 on the season. He's been a little bit more consistent than Devonta Smith has. And right now he is in essentially an average matchup against Indianapolis. Whereas Devonta Smith, who's my wide receiver 28 on the season, and whose projections are without games where A.J. Brown did not play. So I think a better representative of when A.J. Brown is playing. So it's all the games that he played and A.J. Brown played. I took out the 2 games where A.J. Brown was injured. And he's also in a much better matchup against Los Angeles Rams, however. But that's why you're seeing these projections. They might look lower than where you see projections elsewhere. I went through and I manipulated them a little bit to look at a more specific sample size. Now, we can do that with larger sample sizes here later in the year. And so, he concerns me a lot. And Jameson Williams, I just ended up going with the better wide receiver today. I could flip these 3 more times throughout the week and maybe end up right back here or not. So just kind of my thoughts on those two. That's going to bring us on to this next tier, wide receiver 26 through 33. As you can see, maybe have seen, my cat is absolutely being obnoxious. She has been for a while now. She wants to be fed. But the thing is, she gets hungry like 2 hours before her dinner time every single day. I don't get what's wrong with her internal clock, but somebody needs to fix it. So my wide receiver 26 through 33 is Josh Downs, Cedric Tillman, Jakobi Meyers, DJ Moore, Wan'Dale Robinson, Quentin Johnston, Tank Dell, and Demario Douglas. A lot to talk about here. Let's start with Josh Downs, my first love of the week, and the cornerback who covers the nickel the most for Detroit, Amik Robertson, is fantastic against the run. But guess what? Josh Downs isn't a running back. However, he's not so great against the pass. Guess what? Josh Downs is a receiver. Amik Robertson, his PFF score of 56 lands him as the cornerback 145 in their coverage rankings. So I identified Josh Downs as somebody who I would not mind targeting this week going up against Detroit. Somebody whose stats I did manipulate as well and doesn't like being with Anthony Richardson. But we saw a bit of a revival of Anthony Richardson this week. So hopefully that improvement will also help the receivers. Detroit, however, has the most targets to the wide receiver position against them. So teams target the wide receivers a lot against Detroit on an average per game basis. And therefore, that's another reason why I identified Josh Downs. A lot of work in a favorable specific matchup here. Let's go. Let's take advantage of it. Anthony Richardson, please throw balls that Josh Downs can catch, because once the ball's in his hands, we know he is a beast. Then we've got Cedric Tillman going up against Pittsburgh in a matchup that I absolutely hate. I don't think I really need to explain this. Going up against Pittsburgh, they've allowed the fewest touchdowns to the wide receiver position. That said, I do have a silver lining on here. I did struggle a little bit finding some of these fades this week. But the silver lining for Cedric Tillman, outside of the fact that I don't feel comfortable with him, he's lower on the rankings this week. It's a tough matchup, and the ceiling especially is going to be tougher to reach because they're very good at preventing wide receivers from scoring touchdowns when they get into the red zone. That said, they do allow receptions to and targets to the wide receivers. Actually, wide receivers against Pittsburgh have been targeted at the 8th highest rate compared to all other teams. And on top of that, more silver lining is that I think that Jameis Winston is not afraid to throw against anyone. So I really don't know how much the opponent will impact Jameis Winston's willingness to just try and make it happen, to throw the ball to these guys. And that's what we love about this Cleveland offense now that is under his quarterbacksmanship. So Tillman and the other Cleveland wide receivers definitely retain the potential to have good days. I do want to make that very clear, at the very least, in regards to their floors. That will bring us on to my second love. My wide receiver 29, DJ Moore, is going up against the Minnesota Vikings. We saw a much looser, free-slinging, better quarterback from Caleb Williams, the quarterback of DJ Moore, of course, as the new offensive coordinator clearly took the reins off of him for the first time together. And by together, I mean quarterback, offensive coordinator against Green Bay last week. Things looked a lot better. He got Caleb a lot more comfortable. It's what you wanted to see from the beginning. I don't know why it took them so long to get there, but, they had to get rid of a roadblock there. So I'm going to buy into this improved play of Caleb Williams, at least to a point. Teams get a little bit of footage on him. Maybe they'll be able to cover him a little bit better. They'll be afraid of him actually scrambling. I think Green Bay went into this with, no scrambling Caleb on film. So they've really allowed that to happen a lot. Anyways, the matchup here for DJ Moore is also very good. Minnesota has allowed the second most receptions and fantasy points to wide receivers so far on the season. DJ Moore, having one of his bigger games, possibly his biggest game on the season, could be on the menu this week. And I'm willing to dial it up. Let's go DJ Moore, now that you're not playing against Green Bay this week. Quentin Johnston going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. And actually, we could use that win against Minnesota. So let's go DJ Moore. Quentin Johnston going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. Baltimore is still the single best opponent for wide receivers in fantasy football. That is, of course, who the Los Angeles Chargers are going up against this week. Originally, I was going to put a spotlight on Ladd McConkey. However, you heard why I was nervous about him and his matchup. And how I found that out, part of it was I went in and I looked closer at most often which wide receivers were getting fantasy points here. And it is the X wide receiver or the boundary receivers who are most often having success against this Baltimore team, and a lot of success against them across the season. Ladd works from the slot about 70% of the time. And so, once again, that's where I think Kyle Hamilton will be covering him there. Q, however, does play on the perimeter the majority of his snaps. It's a great matchup, and I'd feel pretty comfortable giving Q a shot this week to have another good week, right? Then we've got Tank Dell, Demario Douglas. That is a rankings matchup that I wanted to look at here that I had a little tough time debating which order to put those in. And part of the reason is because I am significantly higher on Demario Douglas than I am against Tank Dell, than the experts are. And that has everything to do with Drake May. Demario Douglas, I have been... I did not realize how well he has actually done with Drake May as his quarterback. And so these projections are specifically looking at games with Drake May, another one that I manipulated. And so I'm a little more optimistic about this pairing here. However, both defenses of the teams that are, Houston and New England here going up against Tennessee and Miami, respectively, Tennessee and Miami, are both bottom 5 wide receiver matchups. I want to rank Demario Douglas ahead of Tank Dell. And what I want to know is that crazy? Last week, maybe y'all could have prevented me from putting Juju so high in my rankings. Let me know in the comment section if you think that I should or should not put Demario Douglas ahead of Tank Dell, both of them in very tough matchups here. I don't know do I think more of one of these quarterbacks in terms of fantasy at this point in the season? Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty close, maybe. So, as the projections show, I feel that Demario Douglas has a safer, better floor against Miami, a team that also, now will probably have to loosen up a little bit against the pass and other teams will have to pass more against them as this Miami offense is finding its stride. So, let me know. Let me know what you think. I don't want to put any more input into that. I just want to hear your raw and unedited thoughts. Let's go on to this next tier, my final tier for this video of wide receivers. However, there are another 20-something wide receivers ranked. Fewer this week. I didn't go into the weeds. I didn't really feel like we needed to. At a certain point, I just don't recommend you start people. So, this tier, my wide receiver 34 this week is Jerry Jeudy, followed by Elijah Moore, back-to-back from that Pittsburgh. I don't know, I probably could put Jerry Jeudy somewhere, maybe ahead of Tank Dell if I get Tank Dell down here. It's tough. It's tough sledding there against Pittsburgh. And then, but like I said, the floors, might still be fine. Romeo Doubs, Jalen Waddle, my wide receiver 37, Rome Odunze, Xavier Worthy, and Jordan Addison to wrap this whole thing up is my fade, my final fade of the week. This could be a week to sit him with a fair amount of confidence. I know it can be tough sometimes to sit Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison owners are probably sitting there laughing because he really has not been good too often this season. But Chicago has a fantastic secondary, so if you were thinking about playing Jordan Addison in a week with a lot of bye weeks, I do think that, if you want to go a different route, I would not oppose that. They only allow 9.4 receptions per game to the wide receiver position. That is, Chicago does. I am not currently ranking Adam Thielen. I don't know how much that impacts Carolina receivers. I don't know how likely you are to play them, but I think if it impacts anybody, it's probably Jalen Coker the most. Not 100% sure on that. So, actually, it looks like nearly 30 more wide receivers ranked. And you can find those up on the website, www.thefff. There's links down in the description, okay? Those will be active as of Wednesday evening at the very latest to these rankings. Peace out. Have a good one.